And welcome back to another episode. In this video, I want to go over an extended essay that was published in 1976 by a man named Sir John Glubb, and it was entitled The Fate of Empires. If you're interested in reading this essay yourself, and I do highly recommend it, I've made it available through a service called BookFunnel, which will allow you to download it onto your Kindle and similar devices, and also by contacting me through Facebook Messenger if you happen to have that, and both of those links are below. Now, Sir John Glubb was very much a critic of how history was taught in schools, and he thought essentially the history was taught in a way that it was either too short and focused on fashionable periods. For example, Greece 500 years before Christ might be kind of emphasized. On the other hand, in his view, history was often kind of focused on the glory of the current civilization and how it got there, and he didn't like either points of view. He felt that the focus of history should be on the human race in its totality. So, for example, at one point he really wanted to teach the history of the Arab Empire, and the people at the university came to him and said, no one cares about the Arab Empire. We're the British Empire. But what Sir John Glubb would say is that the Arab Empire, its rise and fall, very much had lessons for the British Empire at that time. And in his studies, and he studied at least 10 different civilizations or empires, he found that all of them had a life cycle of roughly 10 generations or 250 years. So, for example, Greece, he would kind of put at 331 BC to 100 BC. Or the Arab Empire might go from 634 to 880 AD, which is about 246 years. And as he studied all the various civilizations, he found that they all kind of went through very similar stages. Now, the first stage any new empire goes through is what he called the Age of Pioneers, or the Outburst. And by this he means there was typically a small nation or some backwater part of the world that no one's paying any attention to, and suddenly it kind of bursts forward on the scene, and the people who make up the new empire are typically poor, they're hardy, they're enterprising, and they're very aggressive. And when you meet up against older, more established empires, which are typically in decline at this point, they tend to be very defensive. So an example of this might be when the British Empire perhaps started rising, and the Spanish Empire was declining. The British started sending out pirates or privateers like Francis Drake, who were constantly harassing the gold shipments from South America to Spain. Now, next comes in the life cycle of the empire or the civilization is what Glubb calls the Age of Conquests. And at this point, the new empire takes as much territory as it possibly can, and glory and honor are seen as the highest values of the new empire. So when you look at the art of this period or the statues that are made, it's typically of great generals or great military men, great conquerors. And another aspect of the Age of Conquest is it's typically made up of one homogeneous ethnic group. Following the Age of Conquest comes what is known as the Age of Commerce. So at this point, the civilization has gained a large control of land. And at this point, trade becomes much easier because the empire is stable and it's all under one governing roof. So, for example, at the height of the Roman Empire, you could actually trade quite easily, from Britain to Syria. Obviously a great distance for that time as of now. But the problem of the Age of Commerce is this where the seeds of decline start to be planted, and the empire starts to get rich, and unfortunately, money starts to corrupt. So next, the empire now enters what Glubb calls the Age of Affluence. And this is, again, where the moral decline of the civilization begins. And the values that got it to its heights, the values of bravery, courage, self-confidence, kind of gives way to materialism and self-interest. And the goal of many individuals becomes to make money not for the nation, but for the self. Education starts to become more popular, but it's not, again, it's not done for knowledge itself, but it's seen as a way to make money. Now, during the age of affluence, the civilization itself starts to take on a defensive mindset, and it kind of makes sense. During the age of conquests, I mean, they have nothing to lose, but now suddenly the civilization does, and they start to get a desire to kind of protect the wealth and the comfort that they have. And at this point, the idea starts to germinate that a civilized people are too proud to fight. And I think in Western civilization, you can see that today in how we absolutely venerate the greatest generation of World War II. Now, they certainly were great, and they did great things, but it wasn't really all that atypical to them. Prior generations saw soldiering and fighting for your country or your nation to be just kind of part of what you did. The reason why we venerate the greatest generation so much, I suspect, is because we don't feel we could do the same thing or want to do the same thing or make the same sacrifices. So we venerate them to kind of hide the fact that maybe we've declined in some way. Now, it's also during the age of influence that immigrants start to come in great numbers to the civilization or the empire, attracted by the wealth that it's created. And at this point, they begin to develop communities of their own within the civilization or the empire. Next comes what Glubb calls the Age of Intellect. And this is where literally there's an explosion of universities and academic honors of various kinds. And there are benefits for this, in that with all the people going into universities, great discoveries often do occur within the empire at this time. The cost of this, though, is that the idea begins to take hold that the human brain can solve all problems. And you live in the current year, the arc of history bends towards justice, and there's no sacrifice. Well, there's no need for sacrifice of anything. And at this point, you get a real sense of duty and service to the empire or to the nation. And also, interestingly enough, you start to see real intensification of political hatreds. I suspect because you live at this point in the so much as an intellectual, or dealing with intellectual things, that's kind of what you fight for, and you forget the values that originally got you there, and reasons why you had to kind of stay united on various things. Finally, the nation or empire enters what Glubb calls the Age of Decadence, and this is the final stage before the empire ends. And Glubb identifies it as very much as being a moral and spiritual disease, and not physical at all. And it's really the result of having too much wealth and power. Much like anti-vaxxers who have never experienced these horrible diseases that vaccinations actually cured. The people who live in the Age of Decadence forget the values that created the wealth in the first place. So, I mean, material success, they see it as almost like a God-given right, whereas prior generations knew that it was a result of courage, endurance, and hard work. During this time, the civilization typically experiences a huge decline of religion. And again, this makes sense because most religions believe in a higher purpose beyond the self or beyond material goods. And so this moral foundation is replaced with materialism and a belief in the superiority of man's intellectualism over the wisdoms of the past. The Age of Decadence is also characterized as being extremely frivolous, and the heroes of this age are typically sports and pop stars and actors of various kinds. So At one point, Gleb points out that during the Arab decline, the historians of that period bemoaned the popularity of lute players. And lute players are it's essentially like a guitar, and how popular they were and how they were leading people morally astray. And when Gleb read that, he thought, wow, you could just replace the lute players with pop stars or actors, and you would have what he thought was happening in Western civilization even at that time. And another thing that happens during the age of frivolity is sexual mores and decency really erode, and you start seeing the genders become very mixed up. All of like the trans issues start to come to the fore, and this makes its way into the culture. Earlier I actually made a video, which maybe I'll link to below, talking about the movie The Last Jedi and how it had these kind of ridiculous characters like Admiral Holdo. There's nothing unusual about that. Past empires had their own versions of those things, where in the past you would have these representations of robust manhood, and then suddenly you get to a period where all the statues, all of the art, everything kind of becomes limp and kind of mixed up. The age of decadence is also an age of great cynicism and pessimism, despite the wealth that the empire typically still enjoys. And the reasons for this is that the intellectuals who flourished in the universities kind of go to great efforts to undermine the values and to question the values that made the nation great in the first place. And citizens no longer make an effort to save themselves or their nation, as they're not convinced that there's anything in life worth saving. They don't really realize how good they have it until it's gone, and then even then they're not able to rouse themselves from their political differences to make any difference. And finally, a major feature of the age of decadence is that women enter aspects of public life that were previously reserved for men. This happens in all areas, including politics and in business. So we think this is all something new that's happening with very powerful women politicians or women business people, but it's all happened before. There was actually a saying that during the immediate height of the Roman Empire before it fell, that Rome rules the world, but women rule Rome. And in about 50 years from when that saying, Rome did in fact fall. Now, in conclusion, I guess the question to ask is decline inevitable? Now, Gleb was quite an optimist, actually. He felt that if the proper study of history, and if people understood why things were happening the way they were, that things could be changed. I don't think I'm nearly as optimistic, because Gleb is assuming that we make decisions as rationally as he's looking at them, and I kind of have doubts about that. I think when you're out in a civilization, and for ambitious men to get glory, if it's to conquer or to build great things, then that's what they're going to do. On the other hand, if all that's been done, and you can get honor and you can get glory anyway by the accumulation of money, and by getting all of the temptations that money will afford you, I suspect men are going to do that. But that's just what I think. I'm really curious what you think. So if you want to leave a comment below, I'd very much like to see it. And once again, you can download this essay yourself and read it. Links below. And that's about it for now, and until next time.